Hey Spuddies, Potato McWhiskey here, and I want to talk a little bit about Dune Spice Wars and my first impression of it, my feeling of it, after having now put about 30 hours into the game, playing it not only on my own, but for YouTube. I think overall, Dune Spice Wars does a really, really good job of taking the previously established sort of RTS 4X staples like Sins of a Solar Empire and Northgard, and kind of like condensing that into a new and interesting experience in a new context. I think the game does a reasonable job of taking that setting of Dune and doing it justice, making it interesting. I think I really, really enjoy it. I've really enjoyed my time with the game. I feel like I've almost exhausted content for the game. I probably just will do maybe one or two insane runs, and then that's it for this patch. But I'm extremely impressed with an early access product like this. Like, it's an early access product and it's already this polished, this good, this playable. Like, if you had told me, like, at the price point, and for the level of quality that's been delivered, if you told me this was the full release, I would be like, yeah, that kind of makes sense. I mean, there's a few little bugs and things to be cleaned up, but the game is basically there. And I'm really curious to see what they will do in terms of future patches, in terms of DLC, what things will be added, what things will be changed. Will sieges take a greater role? Will, the Emperor himself take a larger part of the gameplay as opposed to just like occasionally spawning Sardaukar on the map? I think part of me is kind of excited for the future of the game, and it's definitely a game that I want to come back to and really, really check out. But I think more or less I'm done with most of the gameplay content I need to get out of it right now, and I just need to wait for the game to kind of bring something new to the table for me to come revisit it in a real fashion. But I think there are a few areas that I think I can criticize the game. One of them is that there feels like there's a little bit a lack of player agency in the Landsrad portion of the game. That definitely feels like it's kind of a little bit overbearing on the gameplay and a little bit too RNG. Now, part of that RNG can be mitigated by making adjustments to how that piece of the thing educates players. I know that it's actually not as RNG as it feels, right? As it feels to play. But the problem is that the Landsrad feels more RNG than it really is. And I think part of the design will have to address that feeling that the player has when they're engaging with the Landsrad system, that it feels RNG. I feel like if you're playing in single player, infiltrating somebody's faction should give you an idea of where they plan to vote. Or if you're playing multiplayer, where they have put their votes. I think this would add a little bit more incentive to infiltrating another player. Infiltrating players just doesn't seem very good to me because you just get like +5 intel, which is not bad. +5 intel is quite good. But I didn't see really any benefits from actually having a high intel level with other players. I feel like the game doesn't communicate what actual having higher intel levels do, aside from like giving you options to do new missions. Maybe you could make it so that in order to do a hostile mission in another player's territory, or maybe missions have a chance to be delayed or malfunction or not be as effective if you're using them in enemy territory and you don't have intel established in their territory. I think there's a lot of mechanics like that where you could see some reorganization of the intel and spying system. I think the espionage system as a baseline, the real takeaway for me for the game, aside from some of the criticisms I have, is that the fundamental baseline is there. The groundwork has been done to build upon, because I could see conceivably every single system in the game right now could get an entire DLC or patch centered around them, and each piece of that game would become would flower into a beautiful, more advanced piece of work. The territory mechanic, capturing territory, ceding territory, taking control of things, that could get a patch and it would become an incredible mechanic. The combat mechanics, the fighting, the interplay of units, how the sandworm interacts with combat, all that sort of stuff, that could get a patch and become an incredible interplay. You could see the diplomacy mechanics get reworked, get revamped, get updated, added new mechanics, and that would become an incredible part of the gameplay. You could see espionage. Every single aspect of the game could be added to and make a really, really incredible game. But I think right now, they all kind of add up to what is just a good game. I don't think it's an incredible game. I think it's just a good game. And I would like to see all of those mechanics be brought into the shape and form that they deserve to be. So that's kind of what I'm hoping for the future of the game of Dune. Now, some of the other criticisms I have are mostly around the UI. Sometimes information is not very clear. In particular, there's these little events that pop up on the left side of the screen, and the icons are really small and really not noticeable. They need to be bigger. They need to be more obvious. And there's just like things like that. And I also think there is a little bit of unit pathing stuff that's really awkward and annoying. Units, like, rather than having units be like brick walls that you can't walk through each other, and like the unit pathing is really bad, so you have to kind of like micromanage them a little. Maybe give units like an actual, like, melee units should have a zone of control where like they actually like bog down other units that are in contact with them, something like that. You know, I think you could make conceivably the basic fundamental thing I'm saying here is that the military unit control schema is just, it leaves a little bit to be desired, and I would like to see that maybe get some changes and maybe some additions. I don't know what those changes would be, but it can be a bit frustrating. That I think that the ultimate point I'm trying to make here is when you give an order and your unit does something dumb, that is frustrating, because I feel like a 4X game, I shouldn't be heavily micromanaging my units, like trying to navigate them around an obstacle. They should, you know, conceivably find their way to the obstacle pretty well. I feel like a 4X game should be relatively hands-off, and I should be looking at the big picture things. Now, I mean, if they want to go for a more micro-heavy game, that's okay. I'm okay with that too, because it gives you something to do in the heat of combat. If that's a decision they want to go for, I'm totally on board with that. If they want to stay with a micro-heavy game, then we can explore that option. You would have to give units abilities. You'd have to give units more, you know, more active abilities and stuff like that. Maybe deploy mercenaries from the Spacing Guild, temporary units in a conflict. There's a lot of things you could do. I think that would make the combat more dynamic and more interesting. I think one of the biggest frustrations I have with the game is that rebellions are like incredibly obnoxious. Like, a rebellion appears, it instantaneously knocks out the airfield, it instantaneously, like, the militia doesn't stand, and since there's no units in the area, the turret doesn't fire unless it's a turret from a neighboring village, in which case it like trivializes the rebellion. And I think that's the big problem I have with rebellions, is that the rebellion mechanic is, it's either like completely pointless and easy for me to stomp out, or it's like a huge pain in the ass and I have to take like a whole minute of the game to like deal with it. And I think I would like more of like a middle ground there, where maybe like a rebellion would start, but maybe they're just asking like, hey, we want lower taxes. So you take a month long 50% decrease in output in that village, and it's like, okay, well, that's kind of like the diplomatic way of like paying to get the rebellion over with, and it's like, you know, or it can escalate and start to spark like full-on revolutionary towns, and they found like their own counter or their own insurgency, and then they go spread to your other towns. I think like that kind of stuff would be a little bit more interesting, rather than it like just being like, okay, I dealt with this rebellion in like 1 nanosecond, or this rebellion like actually like completely hindered my plans. I think it would be nice if there was like a little bit more of a middle ground. They feel very, very high and low rolly. But yeah, other than that, like I'm pretty happy with it overall. I'm trying to think of like, what are the other things about the game that really didn't stand well with me? I do think that the sandworm is a little bit too easy to deal with. It's the sandworm, if you micro correctly, the sandworm is basically not a threat ever, as far as I've found. So that's something to consider, is I just really haven't found the sandworm to be a problem to deal with. It's very exploitable to get the AI to get eaten by the sandworm. So yeah, maybe some sandworm changes would be cool. I mean, like, the sandworms are a huge part of the Dune universe. So maybe what would be... personally, I actually... You know, one of the things that I'm going to criticize this game on is the idea that like the spice patches don't move. I think it would be a little bit more interesting and more micro, like from an actual playing the game perspective, if like the spice fields would wax and wane, like they would pop up, and then you would have these like harvester refineries, and you would deploy your harvesters even in neutral territory, and then have to like try to protect them with like airborne troops, or, you know, try to set up like carryalls to pick them up and stuff like that. And I think that would be a little bit more interesting to me if the harvester system wasn't so passive. I think it's okay for the Fremen to have a passive harvesting system, but I can't help but feel like that system was in the game at some point and they decided to go against it for whatever reason. But yeah, I feel like it would be kind of more interesting, because you could have conceivably like Omega, like a sandworm, like just pops up out of the ground and like deposits like the Omega giga node of spice, and everyone is like rushing to deploy military, and spice harvesters to try and control it, because that feels a little bit more like the Dune universe I know and the Dune board game. But yeah, maybe that doesn't work for whatever reason. They decided that, the passive system was a little bit more interesting. Who knows? I also think right now there's only really there's a few uses for spice, but right now you can basically do two things with spice. You can sell it or you can stockpile it. I think it would be interesting if you could start to distribute spice to your military, or whatever, especially as the Fremen. I feel like spice should almost be not like mana, but it should be a resource that you can spend for some kind of benefit. Because I'm pretty sure you could use spice to, you could spend spice on your agents to boost their intel gathering. You could spend spice on military units to, I don't know, maybe increase their combat stats a little bit. I think there's a lot of potential here for giving spice a bigger role in the actual moment-to-moment gameplay, rather than just being a siloed resource that you sell or stockpile. That would be my take on the spice end of things. I also think it's kind of a bit weird that you can just infinitely stockpile spice without infrastructure. There are spice silos in the game, so I have to assume that at one point spice silos allowed you to stockpile more spice, but they decided to take that out of the game. These are things that I'm inferring from the game design and where it is right now, because obviously you design an aspect of the game and realize it's not fun. But I think maybe that probably wasn't as fun as it had originally been thought. Yeah, I think they've made some reasonable compromises with what the game is and what it was trying to be. So I would come away from it. I would recommend it. I would recommend it in a general case. If spending €20 on a game and getting 10 to 30 hours out of it is within scope of your budget, then I would 100% recommend the game as it stands. If you're a little bit if you don't love 4X RTS games, and if you have a limited budget or anything that would maybe make you take a step back from instantaneously buying the game, then I would say just wait. Maybe 6 months to a year. We'll probably get some patches. We'll almost certainly get a DLC at some point after early access. And when one of those things drops, maybe then it would be more of a sure thing for you to jump into the game. But yeah, as it stands, totally recommend the game. As an early access title, I got my money's worth. Even though I think I got the game for free, but had I bought it, I would have got my money's worth. At the price point, I think, let me just check my Steam here, 2 seconds. I think I got 31 hours of gameplay out of the game, which I think is pretty respectable. It's a pretty good amount of hours to get out of a game that costs, I believe it's 20 or 25 euro. It's €30. I think, we're at that point, we're at an hour, a euro per hour of entertainment. You're never good. Video games give you such efficiency. So if you think you're going to get that kind of time out of it, then definite purchase. If you think if you're not sold on it, you're not going to really get your money's worth, I would give it a pass for now. So that's kind of my ultimate opinion on Dune. Spice Wars, it's good, it's worth playing, it's fun, and I would recommend it if your budget and time allows you to really maximize how much you get out of it. I love you all very much, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.